All of that, and we're joined by Stan Shamu from IG in Melbourne. Stan, great to see you there. Yeah, what was the reasons for you for the weakening US dollar overnight?
Morning, Brady. Yeah, it absolutely looks like it's a little bit of positioning ahead of Bernanke's testimony. Of course, the mix of news coming out overnight was actually fairly positive. From an economic data point of view in the US, we had better than expected industrial production. CPI was ahead of expectations, and we also had that house market index coming in quite strongly as well. I think it was the highest level since 2006. So it certainly looks like there is a lot of optimism in the US at the moment. But of course, with the US dollar, it really looks like markets have taken Bernanke's comments from the Q&A session last week in stride. And that has really continued to see investors and analysts alike continue to feel that Bernanke will come in quite dovish tonight. He'll probably re-emphasize the fact that they're quite happy to keep policy quite easy for as long as it takes to ensure that the US economy is in a solid recovery mode. But in such situations, we generally see a sell the rumor, buy the fact affair. And once Bernanke comes out, chances are we might actually see investors start to come back into the US dollar, and this would then in turn start to weigh on the risk space. Of course, the Aussie dollar is one of the biggest beneficiaries of this fall in the US dollar, with the dollar index actually dipping below 82.50. We have seen the Aussie dollar manage to push through that 92 level and trade about 92.5. Heading into today's Asian trade. Of course, the move was triggered by those RBA minutes yesterday, and it's really just continued to run. In the short term, we feel as it approaches that 93 level is where we can start looking at resistance. Of course, that was the initial source of the original breakdown for the Aussie dollar as it headed down to 90. And we feel this is near-term resistance, and this might warrant a bit of caution for investors heading into Bernanke's comments.
We were speaking to a couple of commentators earlier, and they're sort of taking a contrarian view on the Aussie dollar. They, even though we saw, of course, a Bank of America fund manager survey overnight saying that the US dollar rally is likely to continue. I think about 85% of those surveyed thinking that US dollar rally will continue into the end of the year. But these commentators we're talking to thinking that, you know, perhaps the Aussie is oversold, that the range is more likely to be 98 to 102 by the end of the year for the Aussie, back towards that parity level. What do you think of that?
Yeah, it seems like a lot of analysts are still firmly in that 90 to 92 level, but from a US dollar perspective, I think that's where probably the trick is. Of course, it's no secret that the underlying fundamentals for the local market are still quite bearish, but I think the RBA is quite content with the current rate setting, and of course they'll wait to see how these rate cuts that they've gone through over the past few months will start filtering through, and what sort of effect they will take on the local market. At the same time, I think that the global economy is starting to contend or to be satisfied with the fact that China is happier with slower growth. So it seems the negative news is definitely out of the way at the moment for the Aussie dollar. So I think that might be a source of stability for the Aussie dollar as well. And of course, although the US dollar is pointing higher, a slightly improved fundamental basis for the Aussie dollar will probably also warrant that 90 to 92 range for a lot of analysts.
Turning to what to watch for today, we've got BHP's production report. RIO's certainly welcomed by the market. What's in store, do you think, from the big miner?
Yeah, for the overall market, we're pointing down about 0.2% to 4,977. So that's just a little bit of a cautious tone for markets after the slight profit taking we saw in US trade. Of course, with the miners yesterday, RIO did very well. They came in well ahead of what the market was expecting, and of course, copper actually was the standout after having after expectations that it will actually be lower with various problems at some of their projects. With BHP, I think analysts are also expecting a fairly good result. Currently, iron ore is expected to be up 5.8% to 43.2 million tonnes. So that's a pretty good improvement in the second quarter from the first quarter, where we saw quite a lot of production problems which were weather related, with interruptions to production and mining there. So that should be a pretty good kicker for some of these iron ore names this morning, particularly with iron ore prices trading up to $129 a tonne as well overnight. that should be quite positive at the start. Or from a crude oil perspective, I think analysts are also expecting a fairly good read, with crude oil expected to come in at 63.7 million barrels of oil equivalent. So that's a fairly decent result, and that will lead analysts to look more sort of towards the full year to see if they're on track. And should this prove to be the case, then some of these iron ore names could be in for a good day, with iron ore prices also trading well. So it might end up being a fairly good day across the risks, the resource space. RIO is likely to start getting some upgrades as well after the recent results. And of course, we've got the likes of Iluka, which also has its output report today. Macquarie might take a bit of a good lead from Goldman Sachs results, which show that investment banking revenue actually is on track, with earnings doubling for the quarter. So it looks like it might be a fairly good day from an earnings perspective for the market.
All right, sounds good. Just finally, got to ask you about Japan. The central bank minutes are due out. What do you think we can expect from those and from the broader market?
Well, overnight, the US dollar weakness actually weighed on the dollar yen, which dropped to, I think, about 98.89. So that's quite negative for the Nikkei for the start. We're expecting it to underperform the region at the start, down about 0.8%. So that should be one of those situations where possibly these BOJ minutes might make a little bit of a difference. Of course, from the last meeting, there was no change in policy, but I think analysts and investors will be wanting to see exactly how close the decision was. And of course, heading into the upper house elections, Japan definitely will draw a bit of attention. And I think as long as investors are content that things are on track in Japan, and of course that the central bank remains ready to act should they sort of veer off the recovery path that they are on with that 2% inflation target, then the BOJ is ready to step in, then this should be positive for Japan.
Great to get your thoughts as always, Stan. Thank you so much.
Cheers, Brady.
Stan Shamu there from IG in Melbourne. Well, let's get more of a sense of what happened on Wall Street overnight. A little earlier, we spoke with CNN's Maribel Aber.
Stocks weren't able to notch another record day. We talked about the red after repeated all-time highs the past few sessions. You know, investors right now, they're exercising some caution.